Welcome to the Conscious Marketer Podcast, the place for conscious entrepreneurs, teachers, healers, and authors who want to expand their reach and impact in the world. Join us and meet leading experts where we talk all things conscious marketing, launches, storytelling, and other strategies to help you serve more people. Find us at consciousmarketer.com. Welcome to the show. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Richard Tabinger, the CEO of Conscious Marketer and the host of the Conscious Marketer Podcast. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Kylie Slavek. Hi, Kylie. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome. How are you?
I'm really good. Really excited for our guest today, Tiffany Scott. And I know you and Tiffany have known each other for a while, so I thought I would turn it over to you to maybe introduce maybe how you and Tiffany met, and we could get going with learning more about what she does.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tiffany and I met at the Movement Makers event, which our mutual friend and Tiffany's business partner, he hosted it, and we saw each other speak, and we just had like this instant bond. But one of the things that I was so impressed by, Tiffany, is that you are such a powerhouse and you care about people and the planet. And sometimes I don't see those two things together. Like, you're super empowered, you're super powerful, you get things done. And I always love when people have both of those qualities. So when you were on stage talking, I was like, whoa, this woman has quite the background and she cares about people. So that was really cool. And I know that you're really good at branding, you're really good at messaging, and you're really good at community, which I also have such an interest in, and we're doing so much of that over here. And one of the things that I remember about you is that you were up there talking about Speedo, and you were talking about how, you know, they were kind of in a bit of they're having a moment, and you came in and really took them to another level. So I would love to hear about that. I would love to just hear about your backstory in general.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. I really appreciate that. And the feeling is absolutely mutual. Yeah, so my background is in branding and marketing. I actually started out as a graphic designer, so I still love design. But my go-to story that I share on stages and podcasts and in my courses and things like that is really how to create brand by going back into your archives. And so what I did with Speedo, fun fact, a lot of people in America don't know that Speedo is actually an Australian brand. It was born and bred out of Australia. So very, very, very iconic in Australia, very iconic. And so very near and dear to people's hearts. And it's similar to here, a lot of people think of it as, you know, the Speedos, the short little Speedos that men wear, or the Olympic-based performance swimwear. And when I went back into the archives of the brand, which has a really rich history since 1928, it had a history on the beach back in the 60s and 70s. And there was this great campaign, retro, iconic, like everything you can think about, beach babes and beach boys and Gidget kind of persona. There was this great marketing material and product that they developed that was just fantastic. And so we did a campaign called Back to the Beach, and we took a kind of quintessential Australian up-and-coming person, I'm not going to say celebrity person, because I just think everyone, no matter what your gifts and talents are, you're a people, you're a person, to represent the brand at that time. But we built story, and this is where Kylie and I really connect. We built story around the brand that really resonated. And I think a lot of people it gives me credibility. Like, working with like a brand like Speedo for 5 years gives me credibility, which is interesting, because the same theory that I've used throughout branding and marketing, it doesn't matter whether you're a, you know, multi-million-dollar brand or you're just a startup. The principles are the same. And so it's interesting for me that story about how I helped build Speedo gives me credibility because it's a big brand. But the truth is, you know, I'm just an everyday person, that this is my skills and gifts and talents that came very naturally to me, that I've built on, that a lot of people need to realize that there's something within them that they can do the same thing. And so I think it's important in branding that you become relatable. And so I use something to tell story that a lot of people connect with because they know the brand, and then show them the evolution of that they can then do too. And it's really going back into your archives of like where your roots are, what your why is, like Simon Sinek, as why that's important. And it's interesting, like 6 7 years ago I was having to teach people what brand actually is and why it's important, and why you can't just have branding without marketing. And now it's kind of like in this digital age of social media, everyone knows what brand is and how important it is, but I don't think everyone knows how to build it. And so I think that's where Kylie and I have a lot of synergy. We're very much about the inner work to reflect the outer work.
So Tiffany, that was really interesting. So you said something that kind of like you mentioned, what are the building blocks of a brand? Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what are the building blocks for a brand? And if you were to look at either your existing brand or building one from scratch, like where would you start to kind of like do that inner work to figure out what the essence of the brand is?
Yeah, there's a process that I use all the time that is, it's not a new process, but it's something that I've developed in a system over time and time again that I call it the mind mirror method. But it really starts with your values. And it's, when people talk about brand and, they often think about, what's their visions, what's their vision, what's the vision statement, what's the mission statement, what are the values of the brand. And those things are fairly well known, but I don't think people spend enough time going really deep into what those things are. I do it from a place of really deep self-inquiry. And it doesn't matter if you're a Speedo, right? Like if you've been around since 1928, or again, you've just started out, or you've been in your business 5 years, or you've been in your business 10 years. And I've worked with people across all of those different, spectrums. And this process is like just so important for developing brand, because it becomes the building block of everything that you do moving forward. It's how you hire people, why you hire people, building team, why you go back to, what does it mean to be a forward facing brand, consumer focused, product focused, whatever it is. And so the method is really start with your values, really do a deep inquiry into what you value about the work that you do, the services that you're offering. And that helps you obviously connect to your why. Like it helps you go much deeper into your why, and you find stories within that as well. So it's values. And then from there, you can really understand how your values dictate your vision, your mission, the services that you offer, the people you connect with, why you connect with people, why you don't connect with people. We're all conscious people here. And sometimes it can be hard to build relationships with people that are outside the so-called conscious bubble, right? But when you can really understand what drives you, and that comes from your values subconsciously and consciously, then that brings a whole new level of awareness, not only to you and your team and your brand, but to those that you're trying to connect with as well. And it builds the building blocks the way that I explain it is, if you think about you're building a house, your brand house, and the foundation of your house needs to be really strong. So when you build a house, you put rebar in, and then you lay the concrete, and then you might put the floorboards or the tiles over the top of it. But you build a really solid foundation, and that's what your values are. And so it's a process. It can take time. It doesn't need to take months. It doesn't even really need to take days, held in the right kind of space. But when you go deep into those, and I really encourage people to really tap into their subconscious values that a lot of people will say like integrity and honesty and value and money or whatever it is, like really things that are thrown around a lot. And that's not to say that that's not valuable and they're not your values, but there's things that run a lot deeper. And so every time I do this exercise with people, they come up with I do top four values, and then we create statements around them. They come up with their top four values, and they're like, they're nothing of what I thought I was going to pick. Like, because they'll, sometimes already have established brand, and they think they've got their values in their, their vision and their mission statement, or their elevator pitch or whatever it is. And then I do this deep inquiry with them, and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So it's a really beautiful process. And so when you build that foundation, and then the next thing you do is you build the framework, right? So that the framework for the house. And those are, what is your vision and what is your mission and what is your story, your why, right? Like, what is your hero or heroine's journey? That becomes a framework for your brand house. And then when you have that framework, you can expand out, and it allows you to have more experiential control. So I've seen brands like Speedo make tons of mistakes. Nike made tons of mistakes. They got a lot of flack for the sweat factories. There's brands out there that have still been able to bounce back because they've had a really strong framework. And so it allows you to paint the color of your house and 2 years later and go, you know what? Actually, I don't want that color to be blue anymore. I want it to be bright red. And you can make, I mean, that's pretty extreme, but you know what I mean? Like, you can make these shifts as long as you're still in integrity with the framework that you've built. So it's a really powerful exercise. And what happens is a lot of people go and build a brand based on experimentation, which is not a bad thing. We should all experiment. That's what marketing is, right? But when they don't have a solid voice and a solid message, they'll go and experiment, and something will work for a little while and then it doesn't. Or something totally bombs and they want to just change everything. And so what that does is it creates fractures in your brand. And so when you build this framework, which again feels really simple because it kind of is, but a lot of people don't spend the time to go deep into it. So that's really key for just the three key components that I can hit on now without spending hours and hours talking to you about the rest.
I would be so happy to hear you talk for hours and hours. And I'm in total agreement. Those foundational pieces are so important. It's like when I create a campaign and it fails, I look at it and I'm like, oh, I did marketing 102 instead of marketing 101. And that's why it failed, right? We try to, sometimes get too advanced and then people don't relate to that. So I have learned everything you're talking about, sometimes in a very hard way, because I don't like my campaigns to fail. So there's that. One of the things that you've said before that I love so much and I agree with completely is to kind of like throw away your marketing and focus on community building instead. And I know that you have built several communities. I can think of 4 off the top of my head that I'm aware of. And I'm super curious about that statement. And I'm going to throw in an extra layer just because of who I am and my nerdiness, but I would love to hear about it in relation to storytelling.
Yeah. Oh, yes, for sure. So yeah, something that I always talk about is like, forget about your marketing and build community, especially in a time and space where people are feeling super disconnected. But I think we're bombarded with how to market, like write a book, do a webinar, do Facebook ads. There's a plethora of things that we're marketed to. Create a course, we're marketed to market and we're told that this is the way. If you do it this way, this is the way. And I think you and I, Kylie, have talked about this before. Like, there's a new way to market coming through, or it's actually an old way because you've been doing it forever, that people are looking for. Like, they're tired of the same old, right? Like, I hear it time and time again, or they're looking for something different. They're trying to find their voice. They don't know how to find their voice. And when you have a really, again, clear message, clear brand, it really does come from story, right? So my story, for example, when I was building community, and I didn't really know I was doing it at the time. I was just looking for something that would fulfill me out there that I couldn't find anywhere else. And I think this is a common story for a lot of people. Like, I can't find what I want, so I'm going to create it, especially if you're creative. And so my story was, I hate networking. I'm an introvert. I don't like networking. It feels really false to me. I went to a couple of networking events in LA and I was really overwhelmed because people were just throwing business cards at me. It was like I was fresh meat, because I was. And it felt really like old school, old boys school of like, let's get something. What can I get from you? And so I was looking at places where I could just expand my reach of people that felt good and safe for me. And so I created a meetup. I mean, I'd only been living in LA for a year, and I created a meetup group just on a whim, inspired action, and started teaching, doing workshops around brand. But the way that I teach is through storytelling. It's through, this has been my experience. Like Kylie's heard my experience through my Speedo story. And I share that a lot. But there's also personal stories that I tell as well that relate to why I started my business. And so I'd start teaching these workshops, and women would come not only to learn about brand and marketing, but because they were connecting with my story and they were connecting with the other women's stories within the group, because we would do like a lot of sharing. And so I would bring personal story into my brand teaching, so to speak, because it was relevant and it was relative. And through that, the community just blew up. Like it just continued to grow and grow and grow. And it's consistent, which is what brand is and marketing is. It's about being consistent. It doesn't mean that you can't experiment and do different things, but there's consistency there. And so I remember looking at this community and watching the same women come back, and then they would bring their friends and they would bring their friends. I was like, wow, what are they connecting to? They're connecting to one another. They're connecting to feeling valued and feeling seen and learning, like this group learning that was happening as well. And so the community quickly evolved into not only just me teaching, but us sharing, and that evolved into another community, sister suppers, and so on and so forth. But I think the essence of any marketing and any brand is actually the backbone of that is story. It's really, really important. I don't even know if I answered your question, but I think there was something in there.
I think you did. I would love to hear an example of what story you told for one of your communities that you built so people can kind of grasp it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a story I tell, and it's still in my branding course, is the story of my divorce. And I really realized, when I was looking to start my own business, that I felt really called to help women. And I think a lot of women feel, and men, I'm not just saying men don't feel this at all, because they do, but at that point in my time, I was really resonating, particularly with women. A lot of women were feeling lost and confused and not knowing how to express or find their voice, whether it was in their business or in their relationships. And so the story for me was, how do I help people find themselves? Because I went through a place where I was married and I had the white picket fence. From the outside looking in, everyone thought that we had the perfect marriage. Like people looked up to our relationship, but they didn't know that I felt like I was dying inside. I ticked all the boxes, right? Like I'd found the perfect guy. We were renovating a beautiful house together. We were taking, beautiful vacations. We had weekend getaways. We had his family living around the corner that I got along really well with, friends down the street, a career that was starting to really blossom, and I wasn't satisfied. And so, long story short, I took a leap of faith in me, and I did something that a lot of people were like, what the heck are you doing? You have the perfect life. Why would you blow that up? And I had to say yes to me. Like I had to get really honest with what was right for me. And to this day, it's still one of the hardest decisions that I ever made, because there was nothing wrong with that relationship. Sometimes when we'll find excuses to find something wrong, but he was good. He was great. It just, we wanted different things. And so I had to really say yes to me. And within that journey, I started to really look into my values. What is my voice? Those branding principles. And when I share that story and I relate it back to brand, like finding my voice, finding my values, really doing an internal investigation, digging into my archives of what my why is, I can teach branding all day long, but when I get up on stage and I share that story and I still relate it back to brand, because I still want to talk about brand and why it's important to business and people as a whole when it's done from the inside out. Every time people come up to me and go, "Thank you for sharing your story. I so relate to what you have to say." Or I can literally look out from the stage, and I've done this many times, and I'll see women looking back at me crying because they're in that place, or they've been in that place. And so it's through that human connection, which I think some people are doing really well and really authentically. And I just love the way that Kylie shares all day, every day. But there's some people that are doing it with an ulterior motive. And I think finding that true authenticity and finding that voice can be challenging in a place where we can be so easily judged. So story is key. And so that is what happened and what I use time and time again as those brand foundations, which is what I forgot earlier. I was talking about vision and mission for the foundations, but story is one of them, to build community. And community every time is actually what really became the backbone of my business and helped me grow my business, and still does to this day.
I love it. And I love just the idea of sharing from an authentic place, not because you have like this agenda to share your story because you need something, but just genuinely wanting to connect with other people and to kind of create a human bond. And I think that the world needs more of that kind of real heart-based, authentic conscious marketing, whatever you want to call it. But it's not meant to do anything other than create a connection with people so they know who you are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people get really stuck on what story should I share, or I shouldn't share that story because it's too vulnerable. Or for me, when I first shared that story, it was in a small group. It was at A.G. Morishita's, one of his Speak Your Genius events that he used to do. And I shared that story and people were leaning in. I was like, oh, it's this story. Like, I didn't know. You're so close to your own story. I didn't know that that was going to be a powerful story. And then it was through that, having a community around me, that a business community around me that I could experiment with, that also could help me create the structure around a story, a new story. But again, when you're creating your own, it can be hard. So I think there's power in getting feedback and getting, people like, Kylie or experts to support you and really help bringing that story out of you, because it really is key.
I love that. And I have a question for you relating to being polarizing, because sometimes when we speak our truth, it pushes some people away and then other people are drawn in, like you've been talking about. And the stories that fall flat, the stories with an agenda, they're not polarizing. They're just kind of fluffy and floofy, and we all see it. It's like when you see somebody post a vulnerable share, and then it's like, and then they go on to share something that has this agenda. But I feel like when we share our actual truth, a lot of people get triggered, and then other people are like, "I love you. I've been looking for you forever." What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Like my time at Speedo, I worked with a lot of celebrities, so I was heavily involved in PR, celebrities and Olympic athletes. And I saw the way story dictated the demise or the rise of people. And I also saw many, many times the way media construed story, like just made stories up. Numerous times I was quoted incorrectly. There were some controversies that happened while I was there where my phone would just blow up and they're trying to get a quote from me. And if they didn't get a quote from me, they'd make it up. I would see actually on the other side where celebrities would actually create stories to get themselves into the media. So I've seen it all. Like, really feel like I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly around story and creating story from an authentic and inauthentic place. And from my own personal experience, again, you're right, 100%. Like, you have to be willing, as a conscious person, a conscious marketer that wants to make a difference in people's lives, you have to be willing to share your truth. And that can be challenging and that can be hard. And I stepped into that again, just in the last year. I've started to create another community with my co-host and partner, Tita Walker, and we have a podcast called A Black Girl, a White Girl. And it's about two women, a black girl and a white girl, having conversations about tough things, about racial divide and racial indifference and white privilege. And when I really started to step into that, I had to be honest about why I was doing it, why it was important, and was I willing to lose people, followers? Because at that time I had Sister Suppers, which had around 20,000 followers on Instagram. Was I willing to lose people to speak my truth and really take a stand for things that I didn't agree with? And I did. Thousands of people dropped off once I started to really speak out about racial divide in this country and Australia as well. But it was through my story and that those that did resonate, all the naysayers and all the haters, for all those people that were being triggered in a very challenging time for me when I was really trying to express my voice in a place where white people didn't want to be heard, right? Where there was a lot of, this is around the tipping point around George Floyd, where a lot of people were really, really triggered. It was in the midst of COVID. Like there was just so much heat happening across the world. And I wanted to say something and I had to share why. And it was the people every other day, just the one person that would text me and say, you know what, Tiffany, thank you. You're doing such a great job. That would just bring me so much relief for all the people that were saying, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. And how dare you? And like all those haters, so to speak, it was the one or two people that would make the difference, would go, thank you, or you're on the right track, or keep going. So you lean into that, right? Like you lean into the people that really get you and know you, but most of all, you lean into your own knowing to get through like the polarization of your truth.
I think that's amazing. One of the questions I have for you, Tiffany, is just, we've used the word community a lot, but I think everybody has a different definition of what community is. So what could you kind of give us some of the elements of a strong community? And, this is a short podcast. We'll have to have you back to answer that question, but maybe just some elements of like what a strong community looks like for you,
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because I think a lot of people, you're right, the word community is bandied around a lot. And I think a lot of people think community has to be hundreds of people or thousands of people. And it doesn't, like if we go back to the days pre-internet, it can just be your neighborhood. It can be your inner sanctum of your family. But what creates a strong foundation of community is a commonality of values. Right? So it really is a commonality of values first and foremost. And then, if it's more of a mission-based community, again, it's the commonality of values and something that you all I'm not going to say fighting for, because I don't know about the word fighting for, but believe in is probably a better way of saying it. So a commonality of a belief where you want to make a difference. So, and that can be big or small. So for example, when I had the community Sister Suppers before I sold it, it was a community of hundreds and thousands, depending on what platform you looked at. But it was a small group of women that would come together every month in a woman's home, no more than, depending on how many women could be seated at the dinner table, but really no more than, 8 to 12 women that would come together with the commonality of wanting to support one another. And it thrived just from that simple tagline, which was nourished inside and out. So it's just a commonality of values and a mission or a vision that you want to achieve together, a difference that you want to make.
Thanks so much. I love how we tied it back around to values, and the values are both the foundation for the brand and the foundation for the community you're developing. So it really is the that foundational stone piece or whatever that you're building. And I've learned similar things in different ways through building our own brand and then helping others to do the same. So yeah, right. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I know that you're a little bit of a disruptor in a sense of you're wanting to kind of shake up the marketing industry a little bit, or I don't know if I'm phrasing it correctly, but I can definitely see we're kindred in that you want a different approach that's more authentic. So what, kind of as we come into our last question here, what would you recommend to people who want to get out there, get their message out, and how can they do it a little bit differently rather than do the same old thing that's out there in the world today, to make the impact that they want to have in the world?
Yeah, I think it's still a question that I'm pondering and experimenting with, but I do really feel like it comes back to if you're trying to get something out there, then be authentic. And I feel like authentic has become a buzzword that a lot of people are throwing around. And I don't think a lot of people know how to be authentic because it doesn't feel safe. And I get it. And I get it. I do really get it. And so it's a stepping stone. Like what would it take to market yourself or brand yourself from a place that feels aligned from you, for you? And I think we get really caught up in, I need to have tens of thousands of followers, right? And this is how I started out in my business was I just want to inspire one person a day. And to this day, that's still what I live by. What if I just inspire one person a day? And that doesn't necessarily mean in my business. What if it means when I'm getting checked out at the grocery store, I make sure to really look someone in the eye and say, hey, how are you doing today? What are you going to focus on? What's going to bring you joy? That's inspiring one person a day, because whether you're doing it for your business, again, this is consciousness, right? Like whether you're doing it for your business, your personal life, your day-to-day life, it's not separate. So I think if you can really step into its inquiry, again, what would make me feel like I'm really sharing my voice today in this moment? Because it changes minute by minute, hour by hour. And then you start to practice that. And I think it is a practice. We're so steeped in a world where we're trying to please one another. We're trying to be liked. We're trying to fit in. It's hard to be a disruptor. It's not always easy for me. I'm naturally a disruptor, but I also want to be liked and fit in at the same time. Like it's a contradiction. And so the inquiry starts with you. And this is why I talk about soul branding inside out. Start with you. Like, what are the little things that eventually lead to big things and big chunks and big impact that you can do every day that makes you feel like you're being true to you and you're being authentic and you're sharing something from your heart? Because people are so ready for it. They're so desperate for it. And they want to see the truth more and more these days. They want to know and see the reflection of you in themselves. Because when we are the example of sharing our truth, it gives permission to people to do the same. And so it's just little by little. And I'm not perfect at it. I get it wrong all the time. But for me, I have to be in integrity with myself. And so that's why I'm constantly talking more and more about, I'm tired of the same old marketing. Like I'm just bored with it, but I don't have all the answers. And I don't think, marketing is such an interesting thing to play with because it changes all the time. Kylie knows that. She's got a really great system that works because she's really good at sharing an authentic voice. And I think that's a gift and a talent that we people that believe in that can continue to share. And again, she does a great job of that as well. But it takes practice. It just takes practice.
That's amazing. I feel like you've done such a good job today of being both really visionary and also really practical so people can take away certain things that they can do based on what you've shared. And so if they want to find you and work with you or get to know you better, where can we send them?
Oh, many different places because I'm multifaceted and do many different things, but they can find me at YouMeSheCollective.com, YouMeSheCollective.com, movementmakers.com. And if you want to plug into our podcast, just go to Insta is probably the easier thing, a black girl, a white girl.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany, for coming on the show and podcast today. Just a quick message to all the listeners. You can find this episode, if you're listening to it on iTunes or Spotify or somewhere. You can also find it on consciousmarketer.com and search for it there. That's where you will find the show notes. And we don't have any advertising on this podcast, but we do ask if you like the podcast to share it around to other people, give it a review on iTunes, post it on your social media. That's the one thing we do ask. Thanks again, Tiffany, for such a wonderful interview. It's really been great to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you both. My pleasure.
Yeah, and we maybe look forward to having you come back. I feel like we just skimmed the surface, but probably we talked a lot about the foundational values. So that was really awesome and really good to hear that it's pretty much the foundation for everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany, so much. It's just been an honor to have you here today. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care.